and well, a couple of nights. Only once did we do this, 1988, this tour. But I knew how good Jason was on the drums, and how good he was at playing the Led Zeppelin stuff. And so when the opportunity came for all of us to play with, John Paul Jones, Robert, myself, with Jason.
There's a certain stillness that surrounds a man who has said all he needed to say, not in words, but through a guitar. At 81, Jimmy Page stands like an echo from another time, a keeper of the flame that once set the world on fire. For decades, he let his music do the talking, thunder in every riff, mystery in every pause. But when he finally chose to speak about the 6 guitarists he could never quite respect, it wasn't rage, it was revelation. It was the voice of a man who had lived through the rise and fall of everything he built. Born in 1944, Jimmy Page came of age when rock wasn't yet an industry. It was rebellion, spirit, and sound colliding in smoky rooms and restless hearts. He began as a studio session player, laying down riffs for others before stepping into the spotlight himself with the Yardbirds, and later, Led Zeppelin. By the time the 1970s roared to life, Page had redefined what it meant to play guitar, turning electricity into emotion, distortion into poetry. Every string he touched told a story: lust, loss, light, and the endless search for transcendence. His craft wasn't about perfection, it was about possession, letting the instrument become something living. To a generation raised on riffs and rebellion, his word is gospel. So, when a man like Jimmy Page chooses to name names, not of those he loved, but those who disappointed him, it carries the weight of time itself. So, when Jimmy Page finally revealed the 6 guitarists he hated the most, it wasn't bitterness. It was a mirror held up to everything rock had gained and lost. Eddie Van Halen, the first name came with a sigh, not of contempt, but of regret. Eddie Van Halen. To millions, he was a hero. To Page, he was something else entirely, a sign that guitar had turned from soul into spectacle. When Van Halen exploded onto the scene in the late 70s, he brought with him a new kind of wizardry, finger-tapping, lightning-fast runs, and endless technical bravado. It was dazzling, no doubt. Page admired the innovation. He once called Eddie a craftsman of precision. But behind the compliment was a shadow. Page had built his empire on feel, on the idea that a single imperfect bend could say more than 100 notes played right. To him, Eddie's style felt like machinery, flawless but soulless. He reportedly told a friend, "It's amazing what he can do, but I can't feel it. I hear his hands, not his heart." The clash wasn't personal. It was philosophical, a generational divide between the mystic and the mechanic. While Page believed in chasing ghosts through sound, Eddie chased perfection through speed. Still, Page never dismissed his impact. He understood that Van Halen changed the landscape, that kids who grew up watching Eruption would pick up guitars and dream. But in his eyes, something sacred was lost in the noise. As he once said, the moment a guitar solo becomes a contest, music loses its prayer. Yngwie Malmsteen. The second name came easier. Yngwie Malmsteen, the Swedish virtuoso who turned classical theory into heavy metal fury. Page respected skill, but Malmsteen's brand of speed and arrogance represented everything he'd grown to despise about the modern guitar world. In interviews, Page once hinted that guitar had become too mathematical. He never named names then, but years later, the dots connected. Malmsteen's neoclassical shredding, all scales, arpeggios, and blinding precision, symbolized the end of what Page called emotional improvisation. He could appreciate the craftsmanship, but not the intention. "You can't teach magic," he said in a 1999 interview, "and you can't calculate soul." To Page, Malmsteen was a reminder that the guitar had drifted too far from the dirt, the blues, and the danger that once defined it. Page's generation believed every mistake on stage was a spark of honesty, the human hand inside the machine. Yngwie's perfectionism, his theatrical ego, his lack of swing, all of it rubbed Page the wrong way. He wasn't blind to talent, he simply didn't believe it spoke to anything higher. To Page, a guitarist's true test wasn't how fast he could play, it was how long he could haunt you. And in that measure, Malmsteen didn't make the cut. Joe Satriani, The third name on Jimmy Page's quiet list was Joe Satriani, a master technician, a man who could make the guitar sing, scream, or whisper at will. Page respected that ability. He respected the discipline. But there was something in Satriani's music that, to him, felt too clean, too polished to bleed. Page came from a world where every note had to crawl out of the mud, out of smoky clubs and sleepless nights. Music was rebellion wrapped in imperfection. Satriani's sound, while brilliant, felt almost surgical. It was art stripped of accident, and Page believed that accidents were the soul of creation. He once reflected, "You can't chase beauty through control. It has to escape you." To Page, Satriani represented the era when guitar lost its mystique, when precision replaced danger. The difference was spiritual. Where Page played like a man summoning spirits, Satriani played like a scientist unlocking equations. Still, there was respect. Page never denied Joe's command over the instrument. He even called him the cleanest player of his time. But the word clean was not praise, it was lament. In Page's mind, true rock should always have dirt under its fingernails. And perhaps that's why Joe Satriani stood among the six. Not for what he lacked, but for what his perfection reminded Jimmy Page that rock had lost: the mystery, the accident, the ache. Ted Nugent. The fourth name carried a different kind of tension. Ted Nugent, loud, political, unapologetic. Page didn't just dislike Nugent's music, he disliked what it stood for. They came from opposite ends of the same storm. Page, the mystic; Nugent, the hunter. Where Jimmy used guitar as a medium for transcendence, Nugent wielded it like a weapon. The riffs were raw, but the intention, to Page, was hollow. It wasn't about politics, though the clash of beliefs surely didn't help. It was about ego. Page had seen too many players mistake volume for vision, and Nugent embodied that. His stage antics, his bravado, his ceaseless self-promotion, all of it grated against Page's philosophy of letting the guitar speak for itself. In one backstage encounter during the early 80s, Nugent reportedly asked Page to jam. Page declined. Later, Nugent bragged in interviews that he had taught Jimmy a thing or two about tone. Page never responded publicly, but friends say he laughed, softly, almost kindly, before saying, "There are players who chase sound and players who chase themselves." That line said everything. For Page, music was sacred. For Nugent, it was sport. And in that divide, the two could never meet. To the older rock faithful, this difference was more than style. It was the end of an era, when the mystics bowed out and the showmen took over. Page didn't hate Nugent's fire. He hated how empty it burned. Steve Vai. Then came Steve Vai, the fifth name. A paradox for Page, because Vai was both admired and resented. His mastery was undeniable, every note deliberate, every solo sculpted like architecture. But Page felt no danger, no uncertainty, and therefore, no truth. Vai represented the new breed of guitarists who approached music like academia. Page, ever the alchemist, couldn't stand the idea of the guitar becoming a textbook. He once said in a 2003 interview, "When I pick up a guitar, I don't know what's coming. That's the whole point." To Page, Steve Vai's playing was everything the guitar wasn't supposed to be. Exact, rehearsed, rehearsed again. Even his stage persona, elegant, calculated, mystical in appearance, but mechanical in essence, made Page uneasy. But there was admiration beneath the frustration. Page saw in Vai what he once feared in himself, the temptation to become so good that you forget to feel. He knew the abyss that lay beyond mastery, the point where you stop hearing the chaos that birthed you. And maybe that's why Vai's name made the list. Not out of anger, but as a warning that the magic of the guitar dies the moment you try to control it completely. John Mayer. The sixth and final name on Page's list surprised many, John Mayer. Not because Mayer lacked skill, but because his brand of blues revival seemed, on the surface, aligned with Page's roots. But for Jimmy, it was precisely that, the surface, that felt wrong. Page respected Mayer's tone, his phrasing, even his occasional flashes of soul. But he could never shake the sense that Mayer was performing the blues, not living it. To Page, the blues wasn't something you studied or borrowed. It was something that haunted you. It came from nights in empty rooms, from failure, from hunger, not from charts, awards, and crafted charm. In one rare interview, Page remarked that some players imitate the sadness of blues, others carry it. He never mentioned Mayer by name, but those who knew him could tell where the arrow pointed. Mayer, for all his brilliance, belonged to a new era of musicians who grew up with comfort instead of chaos. And for Jimmy, that lack of danger dulled the sound. He reportedly said to a journalist in his later years, "You can't play pain if you've never sat in it." It was a quiet, almost sorrowful statement. Not cruelty, just clarity. Page had watched an entire generation of players turn music into polish, and he longed for the dirt. Still, even in disapproval, Page's tone carried melancholy rather than malice. He understood that Mayer, like many before him, was chasing the same ghost, that elusive spirit of authenticity. But for Jimmy Page, no imitation, no matter how beautiful, could replace the raw ache of truth. And so, Mayer's name closed the list, not as an enemy, but as a symbol, a reminder that in the modern age, even sincerity can sound rehearsed. Looking at these 6 names, Van Halen, Malmsteen, Satriani, Nugent, Vai, and Mayer, a pattern emerges, not of rivalry, but of mourning. Page's criticism was never about notes or fame, it was about the fading spirit of mystery in music. He came from a generation that believed the guitar was a bridge to something divine, not a toy, not a contest, but a vessel. His dislikes weren't born of jealousy, they were rooted in heartbreak. To Page, each of these players represented a piece of the soul that rock had misplaced, and yet, in every criticism lies hidden admiration. Because even as he rejected their methods, he knew they had carried the torch, differently, but forward. That's the paradox of an old master. The ones he disapproves of are often the proof that his own legacy endures. If you grew up in those years, when a single riff could set your spirit ablaze, you understand what he meant. You remember when the first note of Stairway to Heaven wasn't just sound, it was salvation. That's the world Jimmy Page still defends, not out of ego, but devotion. Now, at 81, Jimmy Page is not a man of anger. He is a man of memory. His reflections on those 6 names are not daggers, but mirrors. Every guitarist he criticized is, in some way, a reflection of what the instrument became after him. Faster, louder, more technical, and perhaps a little less human. In the quiet moments, Page has said that he doesn't listen to much modern music. "It's all there," he once remarked softly. "Everything I needed to hear, I already played." That wasn't arrogance, it was peace, the kind that comes from knowing you were part of something that will never happen again. When he looks back, it isn't envy that fills him. It's nostalgia, the kind you feel when you hear the crackle of a vinyl record and remember the first time rock made your chest vibrate. For him, the real battle was never between guitarists, but between soul and speed, mystery and mastery, magic and method. And maybe that's the truth behind the word hate. He never hated the players. He hated the loss of wonder. The moment guitar turned into mathematics, and the prayer turned into performance. To the listeners who remember those golden nights, when music was rebellion and melody was faith, Page's reflection feels personal. It's a reminder that what made rock eternal wasn't the perfection of the hands, but the imperfection of the heart. So as his fingers rest now, as time quiets the storm, Jimmy Page leaves us with more than riffs and solos. He leaves a question, one that echoes through every amp and empty hall. When the magic leaves the music, do we still hear the truth? Jimmy Page's revelation is less a confession and more a chronicle, a statement from one of the last architects of the electric age. His critique isn't about rivalry, but about the changing DNA of rock itself. Page belongs to an era when guitar was a journey inward, not a race outward. His words remind us that behind every amplifier and spotlight once stood a pilgrim, not a performer. In voicing his disapproval, he unknowingly defined his generation, a brotherhood of players who believed that every note should bleed, that music was meant to be imperfect, alive, unpredictable, like the hands that played it. His legacy isn't just in riffs or records, but in that philosophy. That art without vulnerability is only noise. I've never tried to play perfectly. I've only tried to play honestly. The moment you stop searching for the unknown, you stop making music. Jimmy Page.